Welcome to the Pyramid Science Foundation Saturday live stream series. Today we have our fearless leader, Charlie Zeese, leading us in a discussion about the ether. So he's going to cover an introduction and bring us up to speed on the properties of the ether and why we should care, what the link is with sacred geometry and pyramids in particular. So take it away, Charlie.
All right, thank you. What we're going to do today, first of all, I'll talk a little bit about the background picture I have up today. This is a painting that is from a website called tartaria.com, and that's TART-ARIA. And it's a website where people can put out their papers and their research on Tartaria and other related topics. But today what they were, the Tartarians, as were other the other empires and civilizations that were more advanced than ours today, they were well aware of the ether. It's a concept that has been in the scientific literature for thousands of years up until around the beginning of the 20th century. We're going to go through a little bit of the history of why the ether was taken out of our curriculum. And, it's no surprise that, if you don't know about the ether, then you're going to not understand why objects such as pyramids can have such an impact on their environment. So this is fundamental information that people, particularly from the West, need to have in order to get an understanding of torsion fields and how sacred geometry and pyramids specifically can impact our environment. So anyway, I'm going to open up, and the 3 videos are going to take about 50 minutes in total. If you guys have questions, let's hold them until at least the end of each video, and then I'll ask for questions, or you can send them into Allie and we'll take them from there. But anyway, we're going to start off with an introduction to the ether by way of historical information on 3 scientific researchers, 2 of whom you probably heard about, but the third one, John Keeley, you probably haven't. And it's a very fascinating history when you find out that things such as a free energy engine motor, which we're going to find from John Keeley, he invented that back in the 19th century, and it never came to market because the interests that B didn't want people to understand about free energy. So anyway, let me start this off, and we'll start, as I say, with this very first video, which is entitled The Ether Research of John Keeley, Wilhelm Reich, and Victor Schauberger. And then after it's over, we can have a brief discussion.
Good afternoon. This is Charlie with Only PVC Pyramids. And today's video is called The Ether Research of John Keeley, William Reich, and Victor Schauberger. This is part of our Fundamentals of Pyramid Science series, and this is part 2 of that series. Today we're going to be discussing what the ether is, and 3 of the early pioneers in ether research. Those 3, again, are John Keeley, William Reich, and Victor Schauberger. Before we begin that research investigation, however, I wanted to go over a definition and an introduction to the concept of ether. It comes from David Wilcock's Science of Oneness book, which is on his website, divinecosmos.com. To read from David's introduction on the ether: we live in a harmonic universe built upon a unified, unseen foundation of conscious loving energy, known as zero-point energy or ether. Up until the 20th century, all Western scientific traditions proposed that such an energy force existed, going back to at least the time of the ancient Greek philosophers and most likely to a far older civilization with advanced scientific knowledge. The existence of the ether was supposedly proven to be false by the Michelson-Morley experiment at the beginning of the 20th century, and most scientists still believe that that is correct. There are a number of reasons why the M&M experiment is flawed, and for our technically inclined readers, many of the researchers that we will be mentioning in David is in his book and in this series, have detailed explanations of how that was misinterpreted.
Whether you're building dynamic network
Whoops.
models or forecasting real-world behavior, Neo4j's new graph algorithm.
We know that an etheric science is the only remaining model of the universe that fits together with the evidence now available. Current theories working with these ether concepts all agree that our physical reality arises from this hidden energy substance, which creates all that we know and see by vibrating. And thus, like fishes in the sea, the pressure of this energetic fluid constantly surrounds us, though we do not normally notice its presence. In this wealth of new data, the etheric fluid is a source of tremendous energy that is in constant vibrational motion, flowing through all objects in the universe, creating and recreating them every second, just as a candle flame is constantly absorbing new wax and oxygen and radiating new heat and light, but still continues to exist as a measurable unit. Should this ether ever stop flowing and swirling about with such an intelligent, purposeful behavior, all mass would shed heat, gradually dissolve, and return to its primordial energy state. The flame would go out. Indeed, this new physics of the 21st century tells us that the very building blocks of mass, the atoms and molecules themselves, are not particles at all. They are ultimately instead nothing more than spherical whirlpools of energy in this flowing river of ether. And the ether itself provides the most tangible scientific way to define, explain, and even engineer the mind of God. The research that we're going to be talking about today of these three giants is coming directly from a book that was written about 20 years ago by Dan Davidson. It's called Shape Power, a treatise on how form converts universal ether into electromagnetic and gravitic forces and related discoveries in gravitational physics. The first of the explorers into the ether that we want to talk about today is John Worrell Keely. John Keely is not someone that I ever heard of until I got into this area, but I think he, along with the others that you're going to find a pattern in these three people. They all figured out the ether. They all figured out how to use it and harness it, and they were all either scorned or put out of business or threatened to keep their experimental knowledge out of the mainstream. So John Keely was born about in the 1800s, and to skip to the important parts of his life, in about 1866, while subjecting water to various sound vibrations, Keely had an explosion in his laboratory, which wrecked his apparatus. And this event was a turning point in his scientific dabbling, and for 6 years of intense experimentation, Keely worked to duplicate the effect of converting water to energy with sound vibration. He found that under certain conditions, a frequency of 42,800 vibrations per second will convert water to pure energy. Not steam, hydrogen, or oxygen, but a much more potent, higher powered energy, which Keely came to believe was the luminiferous ether, the very energy out of which the universe was formed. And Keely's discovery of the dissociation or etherealization of water was a fantastic discovery in and of itself, but Keely was intent on discovering all the physics behind this phenomenon. During his career, Keely used the basic discovery of converting water to pure energy to build many demonstrations utilizing that force to lift huge weights, control the force of gravity by making objects lighter or heavier, propelling projectiles, and many others. The water etherealization effect was perfected by Keely to the point of being able to break down the atomic nucleus into 27 levels or gradations of finer and finer energies. This is akin to modern physics, where they have found numerous subatomic particles, which are the building blocks of the nuclear particles such as protons, electrons, and neutrons. Keely claimed that there were countless phenomena associated with each of these energy levels within the nucleus. And some of these included energies which governed how the brain and mind operated, how gravity was produced, and what the forces were that created electricity and magnetism. Now to get into some interesting commercial attempts to put this into commercialization. In 1874, a group of investors formed around Keely the Keely Motor Company with the expressed intention of exploiting this newfound etheric force by using it to power motors. The company proved to be only a burden to Keely and of no practical assistance in his research. He wasn't a businessman, and the affairs of the company did not interest him. As a result, the motor company was eventually dissolved, but not until its founders had exploited its stock for everything they could squeeze out of the company, leaving Keely holding the bag. However, I was able to find some interesting data, which is kind of beyond the scope of this discovery, but this next page here is a page from a source that I have linked down below. It's a picture of this motor, and it's a letter, which in its entirety is in the link below, from the editor of something called Scientific Arena in July of 1886. And what it talks about, we'll just read this first paragraph. These experiments have continued till satisfactory all around, and until many present had been supplied with flattened bullets. The final and most important demonstration of all was given in the actual running of the Keely motor itself, of which the world has heard so much, and which consisted of a 25 horsepower rotary engine actuated alone by this so-called etheric vapor. And here we approach the description of a performance of very simple machinery for which our readers will need to summon all their resources of credulity in order not to suspect us of deliberate fabrication. But we declare in advance that we are about to state the facts of which we are as positively certain as we are that we were personally there and there present. And in the rest of that letter, they go on to talk about the fact that this engine ran on water alone. Now, there's a lot more that we could talk about Keely at this point, but suffice it to say that his company was never allowed to function. The shareholders were squabbling. In my opinion, it would be interesting research for those that are interested to find out why, since his motor functioned properly, it never got to market. I think we can all kind of have some ideas as to why that might be the case. But here's a researcher who did a tremendous amount of work, did work in levitation as well, and we've never heard of his work in mainstream science. The second person we want to talk about is Wilhelm Reich. I think most of us have heard of Reich and know of his work. Wilhelm Reich was born in 1897 in Austria and got his training at the University of Vienna from 1918 to 22, where he finished a 6-year medical degree in only 4 years. His postgraduate work was in neuropsychiatry and internal medicine. He was one of Sigmund Freud's star pupils and worked as first clinical assistant for 6 years at Freud's psychoanalytic polyclinic from 24 to 30. From 30 to 33, he founded various mental hygiene centers in Austria and Germany, and he left Austria and Germany for Norway to escape persecution by the Nazis. Wright discovered orgone energy while he was searching for an energy that was part of neurotic behavior. His breakthrough research in orgone physics was started in Oslo, Norway, at the Psychological Institute of Oslo University. In 1939, Reich moved his Norway laboratory to Forest Hills, New York, where he eventually acquired United States citizenship. He was an associate professor of medical psychology in New York City and at his New School for Social Research, where he lectured on his discoveries in orgone energy. In 1942, Reich set up his research facility, the Orgone Institute in Raisley, Maine, and he termed his new science orgonomy.
Not long ago, Rita Levi Montalcini celebrated her 103rd birthday. And then during
The main theme of his research is that orgone energy is a condensed form of etheric energy, the orgone box, which he invented with its layering of natural dielectric and conductive materials, collects and intensifies orgone energy so it can be utilized. And orgone energy has potential uses in the health science to bring about better, more natural, non-invasive forms of healing and therapy. We didn't go into it in any great detail, but the end of his career was one where the FDA vilified his work and ruined his career. So here's another example of a pioneer in orgone research and etheric research whose career was ruined by the powers that be. The third that we want to talk about today is Victor Schauberger. Photo here of Victor. Victor was born in Vienna, Austria, and from childhood, Victor was at home in the forest, was a close observer of nature, the animals, earth, trees, and water. Water was to become his lifelong passion, and he determined at a very early age to discover the laws and secrets of water. Schauberger saw water as a living substance filled with life and life's energies. Schauberger pursued private research. His first development was a machine which would provide good drinking water that was alive with natural vital energy. This was an egg-shaped container which had a simple, small impeller in the bottom of the container. The impeller would spin at a very high speed and cause the water to form into a natural vortex, i.e. a three-dimensional spiral. Victor had discovered that when water or any other fluid or gas was spun in a vortex, it would pick up an energy charge. And this prototype has been adapted, obviously, but it's now a very popular water machine. There's a number of them. The Vitalizer Plus is probably the most well-known structured water device in the world. Victor Schauberger discovered a universal energy, which was the opposite from normal electricity. It existed everywhere and was the basic foundation of life and substance. Basically, Victor rediscovered the ether as diamagnetism, the same as Reich had discovered the ether as orgone energy. Diamagnetism was conducted by non-conductors, hence the reason he called it diamagnetism, after the scientific term for a non-conductor. Schauberger discovered that diamagnetism, or the ether, would follow spiral and vortical pathways, and that these types of pathways would act as connectors of diamagnetism. By forcing fluids to move in special vortex guides, he could cause the fluid to be charged with diamagnetism, which in turn would cause the atoms of the fluids to collect an electrostatic charge. Gravity was also found to be related to diamagnetism. By moving the ether in a vortical pattern, matter within the vortex would lose weight and levitate. This effect was the basis, listen to this, of his disc flying machines. Schauberger experimented with various hydrodynamic fluids such as water, air, and sand as the basis for the material he ran through his levitation motors. Helpful life-giving effects were also discovered to be associated with diamagnetism, Victor found that when foods and beverages were charged with diamagnetism, they improved the person's health. Now to expand a little bit on the subject that I'm sure all of you are most interested in, by 1930, Schauberger had developed anti-gravity machines which could fly much higher and faster than any known aircraft of the day, and developed free energy devices which achieved tremendously higher output than input power. The gravity machines resemble flying saucers or UFOs, and are documented, as have been documented by thousands of observers over the years. And a couple of the pictures of Schauberger's experimental craft are shown on the next page. In 1934, Victor was, quote unquote, requested to meet with Hitler, and Hitler offered Schauberger a job as a scientist developing aircraft based upon the anti-gravity discovery. When Schauberger refused, Hitler put Victor's family in a prison camp and forced Victor to work on his inventions for Hitler. The Third Reich on anti-gravity craft from 1938 to 1945. The Allied forces took over Germany. The Army Intelligence Corps discovered Schauberger's research, including several unfinished disc craft. This brought a new peril to Schauberger in the form of vested interests who did not want free energy technology to be released for public use. And Victor Schauberger died a broken man, and about 10 years later, in I believe it was around 1958, after he apparently refused to assist American corporations who were attempting to exploit the technologies that had been taken from him at the end of World War II. So here we see three early pioneers into the sciences, science available from the ether, and we've seen three different applications of a motor that could run on water. We saw a box that could create and store etheric energy. And finally, with Victor Schauberger, we saw how water and ultimately that technology was transformed into anti-gravity machines. And all of these devices have ultimately gone out of the mainstream scientific community and have been put pretty much under wraps by government and other forces. So the ether exists, and now that we've seen what's happened in the past, in the next series we're going to go over some more contemporary research that demonstrates even further the validity of the ether and torsion fields in that ether. As always, remember to tell your friends.
Okay, so that's the end of the first one. And again, those were three 19th century and early 20th century scientists who were able to tap into the ether and show it. So what we're going to do next, first of all, are there any questions or comments about what we saw? If
Elena
not,
said the link that you talked about earlier didn't work. The tar-taria.com, or is it tart-area.com?
I believe it's it's TART-ARIA, and it's either .org. It might be org or com. I'm not sure.
Maybe .org. That's
Yeah,
right.
it might be. Not sure.
I hope that helps. Thank you.
We'll see. Maybe you can check it while we're doing the next one. So anyway, the next one, we're going to talk about three classic scientific experiments that were done in the early part of the 20th century by three different scientists proving the existence of the ether. And so let's get started. All right, let me get rid of this.
This is about our YouTube channel, Only TV.
All right, here we go.
Good morning. This is Charlie with Only PVC Pyramids. This is a video in our continuing series on the fundamentals of pyramid science. This is part 3 of that series, and the title of today's video is The Aether Research of Hal Puthoff, Harold Aspin, and Bruce De Palma. In part 2 of this series, we discussed the research of John Keeley, William Wright, and Victor Schauberger, 3 of the real giants from the 19th and 20th centuries in ether research. John Keeley, for a brief review, had extensive workings with a water-powered engine that he had developed and tried to put into the market in the 1860s. And also did a lot of research in anti-gravity. William Wright, who's familiar to most of us, was the inventor of the orgone generator. And finally, Victor Schauberger, an Austrian scientist, started out working with structured water, figured out ways, in fact, to spiral water to have it cut through steel, but also was forced to work for Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich, developing anti-gravity machines. But today, again, we're going to be studying Harold Aspin, Hal Puthoff, and Bruce De Palma. The information that we're using today is coming from the book Divine Cosmos by David Wilcock, a free book on his website called divinecosmos.com. And again, the first scientist we're going to talk about today, there's a picture of him up now, is Hal Puthoff. Hal is a PhD in electrical engineering from Stanford University, and currently is the president of the Institute for Advanced Studies in Austin, Texas, and was also an original member of the remote viewing program of the U.S. government. But to review his experiment, again, these are David Wilcock's words. One early example of proof for the existence of the ether comes from Dr. Hal Puthoff, a respected scientist from Cambridge University. Puthoff frequently mentions experiments from the early 20th century that were designed to see if there was any energy in empty space conducted before quantum mechanics ever existed. In order to test his idea in the laboratory, it was necessary to create an area that was completely free of air, a vacuum, and lead shielded from all known electromagnetic radiation fields by using what is known as a Faraday cage. This airless vacuum space was then cooled down to absolute zero, or minus 273 degrees centigrade, the temperature where all matter should stop vibrating and thus produce no heat. These experiments proved that instead of an absence of energy in the vacuum, there was a tremendous amount of it from a completely non-electromagnetic source. Dr. Puthoff has often called this a seething cauldron of energy in very high magnitudes.
People with ADHD save 10 hours studying with this Chrome extension, but no, by all means.
Since this energy could still be found at absolute zero, this force was dubbed zero-point energy, or ZPE, whereas the Russian scientists usually called it the physical vacuum, or PV. Recently established mainstream physicists John Wheeler and Richard Feynman have calculated that the amount of zero-point energy in the space volume of a single light bulb is powerful enough to bring all of the world's oceans to the boiling point. Clearly, we are not dealing with some weak, unseen force, but rather a source of almost impossibly grand power, which could have more than enough strength to sustain the existence of all physical matter. In the new view of science that is emerging from ether theory, all 4 of the basic force fields, gravity, electromagnetism, weak nuclear, and strong nuclear forces, are all simply different forms of the ether. More and more, the scientific community is being forced to accept that atoms and molecules are akin to candle flames, where the energy they release, such as the heat and light of the flame, must be balanced by energy that they absorb, such as the wax of the candle and the oxygen in the air. This candle analogy is a hallmark of Dr. Puthoff's model, which he uses to explain why the hypothetical electron does not radiate away all of its energy and crash into the nucleus. This seemingly perpetual motion within the atom is simply explained away as the magic of quantum mechanics in the mainstream view. So here's some fundamental work here that has helped to bring a rebirth of interest and knowledge and understanding of the ether into mainstream science. The next scientist results that we're going to talk about is Harold Aspen. And Harold is from Cambridge University and has a website called etherscience.org, which is just a treasure trove of information on the ether. Interesting sidelight, when I was looking up Harold to find some background information on him, I found out that Wikipedia in English has absolutely no information on Harold Aspen. But if you don't mind translating from Spanish, you can find it on Wikipedia. I wonder how that happened. Anyway, the Aspen effect is described below. Another example of latent forces existing in a system is found in the Aspen effect, discovered by Dr. Harold Aspen of Cambridge University. This experiment involved a gyroscope whose central wheel was fashioned from a powerful magnet. The normal amount of energy that would be required to rotate the gyroscope to a certain maximum speed was 1,000 joules. Like a glass of water being stirred up with a spoon, the rotation of the gyroscope would cause the etheric energy inside its central wheel to begin spiraling, and thus churning movement would continue inside the object even once Dr. Aspen brought the gyroscope to a stop. Surprisingly, for up to 60 seconds after Aspen's gyroscope stopped rotating, it would take 10 times less energy to return it to the same velocity as it had attained the first time. In other words, only 100 joules rather than 1,000 joules. This is another reproducible effect that has simply been ignored by mainstream science because it, quote, violates the laws of physics. However, with Kozyrev's work as a background, and we haven't discussed Kozyrev, but we will be getting to him shortly, we can hear the chuckles of Russian scientists as they read of Dr. Aspen's troubles in getting anyone in the West to acknowledge this effect. Wonder why he's not on Wikipedia? Our third scientist is Bruce De Palma. Bruce De Palma was a graduate of both Harvard and MIT, and you can find out a lot about him, including his famous N machine on brucedepalma.com. And just like Dr. Aspen, don't look for any information about Bruce De Palma on Wikipedia in English, but you can find it in Polish if you can translate it. De Palma's spinning ball experiment is a perfect example of harnessing torsion waves by rotation and was discovered completely independently by Dr. Bruce De Palma, frequently cited by Richard Hoagland on the Enterprise Mission website. Within a complete vacuum, De Palma took two steel balls and catapulted them into the air at equal angles with an equal amount of force. The only difference was that one ball was rotating at 27,000 times per minute and the other was not. The rotating ball traveled higher into the air and descended faster than its counterpart, which violated all known laws of physics. The only explanation for this effect is that both balls are drawing energy into themselves from an unseen source, but the rotating ball is soaking up more of this energy than its counterpart, energy that would normally exist as gravity moving down into the earth. Now that's a really tough one to get your head around. And I continue to grapple with this because I'm used to thinking, as we all are, of the center of the earth being the source of the gravitational pull, pulling objects down from the earth, not having it come from the ether above the earth and be pressing down upon us. So from that direction. So we're going to think about that. We need to, I do, think about it long and hard to really get my arms around it. But this is a tremendously important experiment in terms of our understanding of the ether. So to summarize these three results, Hal Puthoff has shown us that there's a seething cauldron of energy in very high magnitudes that exists in the ether. And this energy can continuously power all matter, similar to the way that a candle flame is continuously powered by wax and oxygen. Harold Aspen has shown us that a gyroscope, which is rotated to a given maximum speed and brought back to rest, requires only 10% of the original energy expended to bring it back to the same maximum speed. And this proves the ether to be like a pitcher of water that once it's stirred up, it only slowly returns to rest. And finally, Dr. Bruce De Palma, steel balls catapulted into a vacuum with the same force and the same angle will rise to different heights and travel different distances depending upon the amount of rotation of the balls. The ball that is rotating is soaking up more of the energy it encounters, energy that would normally exist as gravity. So here we have three more scientists, three more very, very interesting pieces of information about the ether and the effects of spin and torsion on those fields. I hope it's been helpful. We're going to continue this research in our next series, part of this series.
Okay, so that's the end of the second one. Any comments or questions? Because these are very, very challenging concepts for all of us because we've never been taught this information before, but the ether is the only explanation for these anomalous experiments, so-called anomalous, but that make perfect sense once you understand that there is this cauldron of energy that we're all existing in, and but it's challenging to get to really get your head around. So, for those of you interested, I would suggest you go to their long reads, but David Wilcock's trilogy on his website has a lot of this information, and it's a great source for you to get more information. So we'll start with the last one, and again, this last
Larry
one.
has a question,
Oh,
Charlie.
okay.
Go ahead, Larry.
Hi, I just want to have a comment. I've heard this. I did David's work. I did his classes.
Yeah.
And I've read his books.
Right.
And I've been exposed to a lot of this information from him. But this is the first time that it's making sense to me. So thank you very much for doing this.
Oh, well, I'm glad somebody's getting something out of it.
The pyramids and everything else, it's starting to make so much more sense. It's actually clicking, and I'm not online because I'm in my sauna while I'm listening to you.
Oh, okay, good.
But
I'm glad it's helping because really, this is just, if you don't have a grounding in the real science that makes that, how our universe is made up, you're not going to understand any of this. It's not going to make any sense. So I'm glad it's helpful. So anyway, we'll go ahead and again, this last one, this is an article that was published by a member of Nassim Haramein's group at the Resonant Science Foundation. It's called The End of the Ether. And he goes through and attempts to explain why we lost the ether from our academic studies in the West, and the implications of that in our misunderstanding of the way the world works. So let me get to this last one here.
Hi, this is Charlie with Only PVC Pyramids. This is part of our continuing series on the fundamentals of pyramid science. This is part 5 of that series. And the title of today's video is The End of the Ether. We're going to be talking today about why the ether has actually been taken out of the mainstream science agenda over the past 100 years. Even after Einstein, who originally thought that there wasn't a need for the ether, came back and restated almost 100 years ago that there was indeed a need for the ether for all of his equations to work properly. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. A few notes before we get started. Today, I finally learned how to update my homepage on YouTube. So for those of you who've been watching these videos and are kind of confused because they were all in a mishmash, I've now got everything organized on the homepage, all the various series about pyramid research that we've been doing. So in addition to this series, you're going to find the extensive series, 20-part series on the summary of the Russian pyramid research, all nicely collated there. Also find some videos we've been doing recently on the LM4 experimental life energy meter, and also the videos that we've been doing recently on the Russian pyramid sacred geometry. Now, I haven't done one of those recently. I've been working very, very hard to get ready for the Conscious Life Expo, where I'm going to be giving this information for the first time. I've got a lot of new information. It will be coming out here on the channel as soon as I've given that presentation later this month. But anyway, let's get started with today's video. As a way of background, I wanted to go over, because I haven't stated this before, what I feel are the 6 core elements to understanding pyramid science. And those are understanding the existence of the ether, understanding the existence of torsion waves and torsion fields, and then understanding the ability of the ether and torsion to organize and structure reality through sacred geometry. Now, we haven't talked about sacred geometry yet. We've talked about the other 2. And finally, we've got 3 other topics: the ability of objects, including pyramids, to act as passive torsion generators, the significance of phi spirals and phi scaling in the creative process, and the existence of a multi-dimensional universe. All of these are important topics. We've kind of covered the first 2, at least to some degree. The existence of the ether we've talked about through the research of John Keeley, Wilhelm Reich, and Victor Schauberger. And we've also discussed torsion waves through the research of Hal Puthoff, Harold Aspen, Bruce De Palma, and Nikolai Kozyrev. I've gotten comments that there are other people that I ought to be including in this discussion as well. And I will be over time trying to include others as well, but I'm trying to keep this relatively succinct in the beginning. I think we've gotten enough proof from these other videos of the existence of these 2 fields, and we'll be talking about sacred geometry soon. However, with that said, one of the things that people should be asking themselves right now is, well, if the ether and torsion fields are good, solid science, how come I didn't learn about them in school? And how come this information is apparently being suppressed? Well, that's the purpose of part of today's topic, and I wanted to go over that briefly with you today. This next page is coming directly from David Wilcox's Convergence series. It's online at divinecosmos.com. There is clear evidence that any scientific effort which moves towards a discovery of the importance of these geometries, and he's also talking here as well about the existence of the ether and torsion fields. This information is being actively suppressed, as those in the secret brotherhood still have a high degree of power and feel bound to ever conceal and never reveal the secrets of the order. Many of these group members have deliberately risen to power in various scientific institutions that are thus positioned to deflect certain types of research, especially those related to free energy and anti-gravity. Richard Hoagland and the Enterprise mission, working with Lieutenant Colonel Tom Bearden, have shown how such suppression efforts trace back to the 19th century at least. So with that in mind, I wanted to bring in a new source of information today. There's an outstanding article which I have summarized for today's video, which is coming from the Resonance Science Foundation. This is the group that Nassim Haramein, my favorite quantum physicist in the world, founded in 2004. Now, this article is not by Nassim, but it's part of his staff. A gentleman named Adam Apollo, who wrote this article, again, entitled The End of the Ether. For thousands of years, the ether, a field which connects and permeates all things, was an essential facet of both the philosophy and science of reality in cultures around the world. Also known as quintessence, the ether is the fifth element in the series of classical elements thought to make up our experience in the universe. Greek stoichon, Japanese godai, Tibetan bon, European medieval alchemy, as well as Druidry, paganism, Wicca, Native American and tribal shamanism, and many other spiritual and philosophical lineages all describe the fundamental elements to be fire, air, earth, water, and ether.
Okay, so let me tell you about this woman we found. Her name's Salama. She's blind, deaf. She only has one leg.
Although the ether goes by as many names as there are cultures that have referenced it, the general meaning always transcends and includes the same four material elements. It is sometimes more generally translated simply as spirit when referring to an incorporated living force behind all things. In Japanese, it is considered to be the void through which all other elements come into existence. In Hinduism, it is known as Akasha, which simply means space in Sanskrit. There are also many terms for the movement of energy through the ether or the movement of ether itself. These include qi, which is a traditional Chinese and Taoist concept of the natural energy or life force of any living thing. In Hinduism, a similar idea is known as prana, which is the life force which connects all the elements of the universe. For Hawaiian and some Polynesian cultures, this field of living force is known as mana. The same concept is known as Rua in Hebrew, as Lung in Tibetan Buddhism, and Pneuma in ancient Greece, and vital energy in Western philosophy. It's also popularized by the idea of the Force in the Star Wars series. The ether played a central role in our framework of understanding natural phenomena in the universe all the way up until the turn of the 20th century. Gravity was thought by both René Descartes and Isaac Newton to originate from the mechanics of the ether. During the time of Isaac Newton, this was a somewhat dangerous proposition, as postulation of such invisible forces working at a distance was considered to be an introduction of quote-unquote agencies into science. Yet even until the late 1800s, luminiferous ether continued to be thought of as the medium through which electromagnetic waves travel. Proponents of both the particle and wave nature of light agreed that light must travel through some sort of medium. However, while the theories of the time required the ether in order to remain consistent, many experiments done to detect this medium failed. Its properties seemed to be too dynamic and ephemeral to test, and many of its qualities had already been explained by alternative theories. Several theories were produced to reconcile the observed properties of light with the movement of other objects that must be traveling through the ether, including the Earth. These ether drag theories were developed in consideration of whether the ether was completely stationary or moved uniformly, while objects moved through it, or if the ether was partially dragged along with massive objects like the Earth. In either case, both theories assume that movement of the ether should be detectable from the Earth's surface, since the Earth both spins and moves around the sun. Many experiments were concocted to prove or refute the existence of the ether using these simple principles. One of the experiments done by Hippolyte Fizeau in 1851 measured the speed of light in water in order to detect if a moving medium or fluid would influence the movement of light traveling through it. Although the effect was much smaller than expected, the experiment showed that a moving medium could in fact adjust the speed of light, supporting the partial ether drag theory of Augustin Jean Fresnel. Although this was disturbing to most physicists at the time, it is important to note that Einstein expressed the importance of this experiment in his work on special relativity over a half-century later. The most famous of these experiments were performed by Albert Michelson and Edward Morley, and the final test is popularly known as the Michelson-Morley experiment. They set up an extremely sensitive interferometer to measure the etheric wind, or the presumably detectable movement of the ether as it passed through a spinning Earth traveling through space. Their experiments were designed to detect a change in the speed of light as low as 0.01%, mostly by viewing subtle changes in the interference patterns of light waves being split and recombined after traveling short distances. Their results, which showed a negligible change in the light interference, regardless of the time of day or the season, suggested that the ether must be dragged nearly completely by the Earth. However, this conflicted with the commonly observed properties of stellar aberration, as an ether being dragged along by the Earth would be expected to distort our view of the stars in various ways. Stellar aberration is an astronomical phenomenon which produces an apparent motion of celestial objects due to the change in the astronomer's inertial frame of reference. This conflict and the failure of so many other experiments attempting to verify the etheric wind resulted in continued rejection of the ether among the general scientific community at the time. When Einstein published his special theory of relativity, it solved many of the remaining theoretical problems that required an ether for explanation by replacing it with a conceptual framework for space-time itself. He suggested that there was a more simple way of looking at things which did not require a luminiferous ether, an idea which appealed greatly to the anti-ether movement popular in science in the early 1900s. The failure of the Michelson-Morley experiment also helped to accelerate the widespread acceptance of Einstein's proposed constancy for the speed of light, which, of course, now we know is no longer true. Following Einstein's publishing of general relativity in 1916, his layman's book on special and general relativity explained, according to this theory, there is no such thing as a special favored coordinate system to occasion the introduction of the ether idea. And hence there can be no ether drift, nor any experiment with which to demonstrate it. Thus, for a coordinate system moving with the Earth to mirror the system of Michelson-Morley is not shortened, but it is shortened for a coordinate system which is at rest relatively to the sun. That's a mouthful. This put the final nail in the coffin of the ether for the scientific community at large. Since that time, the ether has generally been considered for all practical purposes to be non-existent.
A recent study you may not have yet seen revealed the
Yet shortly after this information was published, one of Einstein's mentors, Hendrik Lorentz, wrote him a letter suggesting that general relativity reintroduced the ether rather than discarding it. While reintroducing the ether would have doomed any young emerging scientist at the time, Einstein by this time had already earned his fame through special relativity and mass energy equivalence, that famous equation E is equal to mc squared. He was still cautious at first, only offering a few public responses that brought up the subject, and his apparent contradictions did not make a new ether appealing to the scientific community. Einstein eventually published a complete explanation that would reconcile his apparently contradictory perspectives on the ether. First, by asserting that special relativity does not explicitly negate the existence of an ether, suggesting only that it didn't explicitly need an ether to explain the relative properties of electromagnetism and movement. He then clarified and explained the essential importance of the ether to general relativity. To deny the ether, according to Einstein, is ultimately to assume that empty space has no physical qualities whatsoever. The fundamental facts of mechanics do not harmonize with this view. For the mechanical behavior of a corporeal system hovering freely in empty space depends not only on relative positions and relative velocities, but also on its state of rotation, which physically may be taken as a characteristic not appertaining to the system in and of itself. In order to be able to look upon the rotation of the system, at least formally, as something real, Newton objectivizes space. Since he classes his absolute space together with real things, for him, rotation relative to an absolute space is also something real. Newton might no less well have called his absolute space ether, which is essential. What is essential is merely that besides observable objects, another thing which is not perceptible must be looked upon as real to enable acceleration or rotation to be looked upon as something real. This description and the rest of his paper, published in 1920, suggests that Einstein saw space-time itself as the new ether. However, this perspective was never popularized, and the ether was slowly forgotten as a metaphysical artifact of a previous scientific era. But to clarify Einstein's meaning even further, he is basically suggesting that if an object rotates, there must be a source for that rotation. If the source propelling an object to spin is not the object itself, then it must be the space around the object. So we can see here that although Einstein changed his views after hearing from his mentor and reconciled the fact himself once again to the fact that the ether had to exist, mainstream science, even though these words were coming from Einstein, refused to accept the ether. Now, we all know that the ether has come back into popular science, but not under the term ether. It's been known as zero-point field or the field and a lot of other terms. But the fact remains that the concepts that constitute the ether have been proven, and although mainstream science today still refuses to use the term of the ether has been proven countless times, and also by Einstein himself, to exist. So what we've seen here is another example of mainstream science controlled in many respects, at least according to Wilcock and Tom Bearden and Richard Hoagland, by powerful sources, has continued to prohibit knowledge of the ether to exist in mainstream science. I hope this has been helpful, and as always, please tell your friends about Only PVC Pyramids. This series.
Okay. So as you can tell, since I did these, I changed the name of the company to Stargate Pyramids, but that was the name of the company back in the day. One comment before I open it up for questions that I think is really important. When I was doing this, I had never looked at options such as, let's say, the flat Earth idea, and I've started to research that. And the reason why that's important in this context, the experiments that Michelson Morley did at the beginning of the 20th century were largely predicated on the theory that the Earth is spinning and is a globe. So it's just another reason why those experiments probably didn't work as well or as in the way that was expected, because there's a lot of data out there that says that perhaps the experimental conditions that they thought existed with respect to the spin of the Earth may not in fact be there either. So, but anyway, hopefully this gave you some introductions into the ether. There's good science that proves that it exists, and that accounts for a lot of the interesting and unique properties that objects such as pyramids can demonstrate in their ability to take these spiraling fields, these torsion fields which exist in the ether, and concentrate them and amplify them and have other impacts on the field around them. So anyway, any questions, comments, or was this too out there for people to grasp? I don't know.
Well, that was really illuminating. Thank you so much, Charlie. I'm just, I can't imagine for the large scientific community to admit all at once, not only existence of ether, but also flat Earth, all these things that are coming online recently to the public consciousness. I don't know, it's a lot to absorb,
Well, that's right. We're truly in an information war, and that's what this is all about. Believe me, if I were to redo these today, those were done almost 3 years ago, I'd have a lot more information and a much better understanding of it myself. So this is a journey for all of us to, even those of us who don't consider ourselves to be scientists. You don't have to be a scientist to understand that if you spin a ball and you throw it up and push it up in the air, that there must be something at work here if it can go higher than a ball that's not spinning. Those kinds of experiments are pretty dramatic. And to think that there was a motor that was powered by water alone that exists back in the 19th century. There are countless numbers of free energy devices that, show and demonstrate the ether's existence that have been taken, bought up by major corporations. The patents are buried or what have you. And of course, others who have lost their lives for, bringing this kind of knowledge to the fore. So anyway, so any questions or comments?
Larry has her hand up. Go ahead, Larry.
Hi, got another one. When I went to elementary school in the early 60s or in the 60s, and we had this magazine called The Weekly Reader, and it introduced us to new inventions and things. And I clearly remember them talking about having carburetors that ran on 45 mile an hour per gallon gas, and a water engines and things like this, and they just disappeared out of the mainstream information. But I remember the water engine, and I remember hearing some of these things, and they told us, and then zip, they were gone.
That's right. I remember Weekly Reader myself. Boy, that's bringing back memories. I remember one episode, one of them. Now I was before you, but a little bit. But anyway, it was about how the communists brainwashed their people, and like we didn't, And so I remember asking my mom to take me to the library so I could read books on brainwashing techniques. And the librarian, questioned my mom and said, well, we have that in the back, are you sure he's ready for this kind of stuff, But yeah, that was good stuff. And it's all gone. That's right. I remember a Weekly Reader episode where they were talking about futuristic highways, where they'd have some little metal object running in the middle of the road, and someday we'd be able to drive our cars, or excuse me, the cars would drive themselves, you know, and it just seemed like fantasy. But that one turned out to be true. Just didn't need the metal strip in the road to do it. So fascinating.
Go ahead, Dina.
Yeah.
So,
You-
does the pyramid geometry, did you say it accentuates or accelerates or concentrates?
Well,
Or all of the above?
kind of the same. It amplifies and concentrates the energy fields that are in it. My feeling, I've got more research to do on this, but I think as it spirals up, this is again, this geometry is sort of this is the inside of the torus, and so at the middle, the energy is spinning extremely fast, and time and space are supposedly kind of coexisting there. You know, and so yeah, it amplifies, and we can, in other series or discussions, I can try to talk about how it clarifies, but that's a pretty complicated topic. But yes, it amplifies, concentrates, and the pyramid accelerates. It accelerates those torsion fields as it goes closer to the top.
Thank you.
Okay.
In your opinion, Charlie, is the ether limited to Earth, or does it extend universally? And does it have anything to do with, is it dark matter, that substance that scientists don't seem to comprehend but acknowledge?
Only you would ask that. I think, I mean, this is my best guess. Actually, I just went online a couple of days, about a week ago, because I had a question. We talk about vacuums and so forth, and you know, as Aspen, I believe as Aspen points out, you can never achieve a true vacuum. So the ether is going to exist even if we suck all of the air out, so to speak. There's still going to be the ether is still going to be there, and so my theory is that the ether exists out in space as well, because you do need a medium through which, this is my understanding of the science, through which light or vibration can travel. So yes,
Yeah.
I believe that it's everywhere.
Thank you.
Charlie, do you have any information about the possible device using pyramid geometry to harvest free energy from the ether?
Well, that's an area that I want to replicate as well, but the Russians did a lot of research on the pyramids they built. They used radar and other devices to detect these energy fields, and they produced massive energy fields. They would put capacitors on the top of the pyramids. A capacitor is a device that will store electrical energy. And not only would the capacitors be spontaneously charged, it didn't take long at all, but they would blow right off the top of the pyramid into the sky. So the Russian scientists that worked on Galad's team calculated or estimated that it would take all of the electric generating capacity of all the utility plants in Russia to equate to the energy field produced by one pyramid. So yeah, I think the answer is yes.
Wow.
We just need to be able to build them and try it, you know, for ourselves. Another topic area that corroborates this, the ancient Hindu temples have this same geometry as well. Nikola Tesla used this exact same geometry in building Wardenclyffe Tower. And there's a lot of, there's a researcher on YouTube named Praveen Mohan who lives in India, and he has done a number of videos indicating that the ancient Hindu temples, like the cathedrals and in Europe and so forth, were actually energy generating plants, not temples initially. So there's fascinating, you know, and I have a picture if you want to. I'm going to change my background here to show you another example of this in London. Bear with me. Let me find it here. Here it is. Now you can see this is the my background now is called the St. Pancras railway station. You notice the characteristic, the red and white alternating. I don't know if you can see it very well in that space right behind me, but
The arch.
red and white have historically been used as the colors for electric generating plants. And there are countless examples that I have of what we deem to be cathedrals in Europe, medieval cathedrals that have this exact, alternating red and white stripes in them. So, but all of these on, up here on the other side, the spires all have this geometry of the pyramid as well. So it seems like it's part and parcel with the ability to generate electricity or to generate power. But once again, all of this knowledge is being, some of them like this are still exist, but this knowledge obviously was universal because we see this kind of architecture all over the world.
One more question. Dina wonders if you can just revisit and repeat what you said happens to time and space in the center or the middle of the pyramid.
Well, yeah, I mean, the torsion fields are coming that we are capturing. First, let me explain torsion fields. They always spin in a clockwise direction. What do I mean by clockwise? If you hold a pen in your hand, it's called the right hand rule. If your thumb is pointing up, holding the pen, the way your fingers are go, that's the way of the spin. So when it's coming from the earth, and torsion fields do come up from the earth, they're going this way. If they're coming down from the sky, they're going this way. So we have different spins, and that's where centrifugal, centripetal, male, female energies come from. But what happens, they begin to spin at increasingly faster rates as we get higher. That's what I want to ultimately be able to demonstrate in my mathematical model I'm trying to put together on this. But as they spin more and more rapidly, they approach infinity towards the top, and at that point, that's where the mathematics of Einstein's equation, unfortunately, EM equal to MC squared is really not particularly good science. There was a scientist in the late 19th century named Maxwell, who took all of these kinds of the spin and so forth into account in what are called the Maxwell equations. But all of those ancillary, which seemed to be unimportant parts of his equations, were taken out in terms of the knowledge that we have of the Maxwell equations. So all of these things that would be explained and were explained in the past through science have been taken out of our textbooks. So it would take a long discussion, and I'm not comfortable enough talking about the Maxwell equations to give you a chapter and verse, but they did account for spin and the importance of torsion fields in that equation. But they were simplified out of his equations by the powers that be. Okay. If that's it, oh, do the red and white colors have an effect? I don't know that answer, Dina. I don't know that they had any impact, but I don't know that for sure. I don't, but if you go look at power plants or our antennas today, you're going to see that alternating red and white stripe everywhere. So excellent question. There is some theory that red brick had had some special properties to it because of the red was caused, I think, by iron, and it may have had some properties to it. I'm not sure. Okay, well, I guess that's it. So I thank you all for putting up with this, but hopefully you got something out of it. And you know, if you have any questions, give me a ring. And like I say, the best place to find information on this topic really is David Wilcock's trilogy on his website, divinecosmos.com. It's dated by now. Most of those books are about 20 years old, but it's still the best source of information on all these types of topics that you'll find in one place. So great place to start.
Charlie, before you go, Julie just raised her hand. Do you have
Okay.
a question or a comment?
So Charlie, you talked about the spin getting faster as it goes higher to the top of the pyramid.
Right.
So does the size, would a bigger pyramid have a bigger impact on you when you're in it then? I see you guys all have the, I think
Yes.
right? I only have
The larger the pyramid, the bigger and more dramatic the energy field is going to be. There are ways of enhancing that, magnifying it. You know, crystals in the pipes like the sand, the capstones, all of those things will magnify the impacts that the geometry itself brings to the table.
I have a capstone, so hopefully that's helping. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, I thank you again, and you all have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Great talk.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.